Sorry.
I can do distant scream also.
Is that a horse?
Can you hear the horse?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
You are listening to the e-flux podcast. We're here in November 2018, speaking with the editors of e-flux Journal, Kuan Wood, Julieta Aranda, Anton Vidokle, and I'm Kaye Cain-Nielsen. And I'd like to begin by turning the mic inwards today on the e-flux podcast. So 10 years ago, November 2008, the financial crisis is full on. 4 years into the Iraq War, 10 years into e-flux, I believe. And the three of you, Brian, Anton, and Julieta, decide to start a journal. Can you tell us how you began?
Basically, I met Brian at Night School. Night School was a project I organized at the New Museum, which was like a year-long series of seminars, lectures, all sorts of discursive events that took place monthly, and which was also based on United Nations Plaza, which was another project that e-flux organized in Berlin in 2006, I believe, which was a kind of an experimental school, which was free for anybody who wanted to attend, quite informal in a certain way, but also very, very rigorous. It was largely a kind of seminar model based, but kind of open public seminars. And sometimes they would be attended by, more than 100 people. So it's a kind of slightly different experience at what you would encounter in a more formal educational institution, closer to like a free school model, maybe of 1970s, 1960s maybe. And so at Night School, it was a kind of a slightly smaller version of this experimental educational model. And one of the most interesting people in the group was actually Brian, and I kind of consistently was very interested by his commentary during the sessions. And we kind of started talking about what was missing in art writing and in publications at the time, that a certain kind of discourse that seemed to be really shaping was not happening on a printed page, but was happening instead precisely in this kind of open experimental discursive platforms organized by artists at various institutions or even more informally and so forth. And we were just wondering, how to create a platform to share this conversation with a much bigger public. Yeah, because the problem with things that require physical presence is that the room is always a limited size. Yeah, so you cannot really have several thousand people attend a seminar, no matter how big your auditorium is, and also not everybody is in Berlin.
Geographically.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so if you're not in Berlin for United Nations Plaza, you totally kind of missed what happened there. And if you were not in New York for Night School, it was a similar situation. So in a way, like a journal, particularly an online journal, seemed to present a kind of a logical answer to a lot of deficiencies of live discourse. Yeah, but
it's also very much in keeping with e-flux spirit, right? What we have been trying to do in terms of communication.
Can you say a little bit more about that, Julieta?
Well, that one of the ideas of e-flux, or one of the principles of e-flux, has been to level the playing field, let's say, that it's not required to be in the center to have access. Mm. So what the journal created or has created, both with the content and with the distribution model, is the sense of availability that Anton is referring to.
But I also want to go back for one more second to Night School, because, one of the components of that particular project was supposed to be a very informal kind of publication platform. And that was an idea of Liam Gillick. Yeah, what he suggested was, rather than to really think about designing a journal or, kind of doing some kind of more developed, form of a publication, to basically invite participants and people that were actually giving lectures and stuff like that to publish urgent text which would be almost like a kind of position papers, and make them available in whatever way possible. Xerox copies, printouts, handwritten notes.
Some is that
almost,
kind of thing?
almost some is that, where the design and the form is not really fetishized, but what is really important is the urgency of the content and its immediate distribution by whatever means possible. So somehow we actually did not realize it in night school, but that kind of planted an idea that something like that was necessary, and that there were a lot of people that were incredibly prolific and generous by way of generating content, and that there was quite a lot of this kind of very urgent content that needed to be published, and there was not a kind of a receptacle for that. There was not a kind of a platform for it, which is, I think, what for me was kind of maybe in the back of my mind. This was the inspiration for doing all of this.
I remember you were thinking about bloggers also then, because it was a time in those years when bloggers were starting to mature into almost a kind of like an editorialized, very kind of mature publishing platform also. But speaking of night school, it reminds me that I had just moved to New York from Cairo a few years before, and it was in Cairo that I had first around 2002 that I had first heard about e-flux. And I remember I was involved with this project, and we wanted an e-flux announcement. And e-flux was very Anton, you were very receptive to that, and that was kind of
so you basically emailed
really
Anton.
And that was kind of cool to also feel like this kind of interest. Yeah. But then coming to New York, I mean, in Cairo there was a lot going on then. And then coming to New York, it was very strange for me, because I felt this was a kind of, of course, New York has a certain kind of a strong art history, but I felt that the discourse was really lagging behind, but also with incredible arrogance, and a certain kind of American provincialism. I felt really kind of down. Night school, I remember, was actually one of the only things that seemed to make sense with what had become familiar to me over the past few years. So it was, it was a really welcome and kind of necessary thing for me.
What were some of the conversations? Go ahead, Julieta. Sorry.
Can I say just one thing before we switched questions? Another thing is, like, at the time I had finished grad school just then, and I was also a little bit like disturbed, I guess, because of the lack of content generated by artists. Mm-hmm. So we were always borrowing content from anthropology or philosophy or any other kind of discipline of the social sciences, but without giving an outlet to our own.
Yeah.
So that was also one of the things that was very exciting about launching the journal.
Yeah.
So more specifically, I remember the precise moment when we decided to start the journal. There was some kind of a lunch thing with night school. It was somewhere in Irving Place, at a kind of an old bar-looking place, and we were sitting outside. And somehow, like, I don't know where the idea came from, but one of us said, "Well, let's just start a journal."
It was you.
It was me.
And I was like, that's it. I think I said, that's a terrible idea.
Do you remember what you thought of the idea at first, Julieta?
I actually have to say that this was something that was down to Anton being very stubborn, because I also was reluctant at the beginning.
But look where you are now, 10 years in.
I'm going to have to go off for a moment because my son he just woke up. But I am here. As soon as I put him back to sleep, I'm coming I'm putting my headphones on again.
Sure.
Of course, take your time.
Yeah, okay. 1 second.
Sure. So, taking what Julieta was mentioning about noticing the need for more of a platform for artists creating content and hearing you guys talk about these conversations that were happening at night school that weren't happening elsewhere in New York, etc. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those conversations were, who some of the artists were who you were excited to invite in. What was the kind of content that that you had in mind when you began?
I think it's very important what she said about artists being it's almost like a kind of intellectual promiscuity that wasn't reflected in the publications. I think it's really important to highlight this. No,
what do you mean intellectual promiscuity?
Like a massive kind of full spectrum appetite for ideas from vastly different places that is basically an active and functioning part of any artist's thinking.
Right. Yeah. But I guess what I wanted to mention, right around the same time as we were basically discussing starting this publication, there was another kind of important event. This was already after night school finished. There was a kind of a unusual invitation from a Belgian magazine journal that doesn't exist anymore, called A Prior, to do kind of a very unusual issue with Rico Teravani, myself, and another Belgian artist, Nico Dux, as subjects of this journal. And we kind of flipped the proposal on them. Instead of being a subject of an art journal, we wanted to make making of the journal the subject of the issue itself. And so instead of commissioning text, we kind of organized 3 days of live discussions, conversations, and then Rickard basically cooked the entire time. So there was like lunch and dinner, and in a tiny space that e-flux just moved into on Essex Street at the time. And in a way, like, kind of, it was a very, very intense experience because, there were quite a lot of people that came to this. It was a very small space, so we were all like crammed into a tiny couple of rooms. It was very, very hot. There were rats running all over because they just knocked down a bakery around the corner. So like generations of rats suddenly became homeless, and they were panicking and kind of running throughout the space. And so in a certain way, it was actually rather amazing. But at the same time, it also kind of made it very clear to me, at least, that is not the kind of model that we are interested in pursuing with the journal, this kind of completely formless, open-ended, endless conversation. So in a way, like after that experience, somehow it was very, very appealing to actually start something that's much more focused, and much more precise in what people normally expect from art discussions, which sometimes just become kind of this stages for performance of presence or something like that, rather than articulation of urgent content.
And another thing about like the idea of urgency is that before the journal, one could feel that we were, I mean, it sounds a bit extreme, but at the mercy of whatever contemporary discourse was being generated elsewhere. So making the journal actually gave us at the beginning, like the possibility of directing discourse towards things that we found interesting. There was a lot of agency to that decision.
Mm-hmm. And I think something just as like a reader of the journal before joining you all just 5 years ago, that was evident is a really strong yet really open-ended thematic push. This is what you're talking about. And also looking back at some of the early years and even the more recent ones, it's kind of evident that certain political or artistic events that are happening now were spoken about in the journal and by the journal authors early on, a couple of years before maybe this entered the more mainstream discourse. So given all of that and what you're all saying, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your process early on of coming up with thematics for journal issues and into the present, really.
I mean, in retrospect, it was kind of a simple thing in a way, because in a way artists are already looking at these things, but then art discourse is not so well. Art discourse tends to be a step behind because also you have a certain kind of it's traditionally operated more by critics who and we don't really know exactly what has happened to them. But if you sort of like go, if you sort of,
the way of the dodo.
Yeah, but then if you sort of shift to the position of the artist, then you become much more agile. But then, of course, the threshold has to become a bit lower, and the stakes have to become a bit lower, where you can simply call it for what it is. If you see something happening, then you in a way you must speak about it. So I think in a way,
I mean, it's something about being able to respond without needing the weight of history to validate you.
Yeah. Or a kind of a titanic institutional apparatus to give its blessing before you can start to deal with something. So you can become much more responsive to the kind of changing shape, of reality itself, informed by political events and technical landscape and technological changes.
And specifically, what are some of the early or later thematics or even texts that speak to all this, that stand out to
Well,
each
actually,
of you,
I think in the beginning we specifically wanted to be a non-thematic publication. And this was precisely to avoid the kind of dilemma that, for example, another inspiration for the whole thing was, in a way, something that Documenta tried to do. I think it was Documenta 11, where they basically had a gigantic kind of publication project, which was supposed to be like the journal of journals, where they invited almost every art journal on the planet, or a certain kind of selection of about 100 of them, to generate content for like a meta publication that they were going to do. But with the way they did it, it was like a really kind of a hegemonic gesture. So they set the topics, whatever they were. I think one was modernity is our antiquity. And I don't remember all of them, but I think there were just 3 topics basically. And so all the publications, on the planet were supposed to somehow dedicate space in their journal and provide content for this set of topics that were dictated by, a very large European art institution. So what we wanted to do is precisely to avoid that, and rather than determine topics of our issues, actually try to find out what are the local urgencies of the people that are contributing to our publication, and actually reverse this and go from that perspective. Brian, you can probably speak to that as well, no?
To turn the mic inward, as Kaye was saying.
And I think, Julieta, you were just beginning to say something first before.
I'll just say something before turning it to Brian. One of the things that was important at the beginning was to expand our network of collaborators beyond our comfort zone. So we were very actively looking for other thinkers and other writers. And something that the way that we used to phrase it actually is that we did not want to be October. Like I remember that coming up in conversation quite often.
Well, we never wanted to be an art historical publication, period, because that's really boring.
It was like the idea of like actually not embodying the ivory tower.
I think the key thing with October, at least from, if to follow this kind of moving, this move from Cairo to New York that I made, the problem, what I couldn't find in journals like October was, or what I did find was a discourse that was so strongly centered in sort of New England, Northeast American Ivy League discourse, and really culturally kind of spun by that, or even ideologically. Also, I guess at that time we were thinking a lot about what I think e-flux was already really well positioned to think about what a kind of or to do something that would somehow advance or embody all of the expectations of a globalized artistic discourse, which is a situation that has changed a lot now. But at the time, this promise of being able to think internationally, but not in a kind of monolithic, not in a monolithic way, but just simply through artistic practices and young, funny thinkers, to be able to move laterally across the planet in a very free way. This promise was something that we wanted to kind of take for granted and really run with, and really take somewhere. Take it to some place also that had a bit of grit to it, because I think something like Documenta's invitation was also a bit of a formless kind of hoovering of different publications, and we wanted to identify also where the tensions and interruptions and contradictions were, and kind of really like dig into these.
What were some of the first texts that felt like they came, once you started the journal and began publishing? What were some of the texts that stood out and felt like they embodied these things to you, and you maybe got excited?
For me, there was on issue 0 a text by Rax Media Collective, Scratch, Mumble, Tick, I believe is the name. Mm-hmm. That text really, I guess, embodied a lot of what I thought was missing, like this idea of the moving target and a lot of prerogatives that a cultural producer can take and stand as.
Mm-hmm. Anton, Brian, what about you guys?
I mean, I think we were definitely really blown away. Also, I think we weren't quite expecting this. I mean, to find these texts by Hito Steyer and Sean Snyder.
Sean Snyder, that text is really remarkable still.
Yeah.
What's something in North Korea?
It was Disobedience in Belarus.
In Belarus, incredible text,
Can you tell us a little bit more about that for people who might not have
read it?
Yes, I think it's the second issue of the journal, right? Or second or third,
It was one of the first few.
Yeah.
I mean, around this time, we wanted to have a lot of artist writing, but then I think we weren't completely prepared for artists' writings to kind of meet and exceed the level and the kind of richness of writing by people who publish a lot more, as and identify as writers. This was, I think it was a real surprise to us, and maybe it may have affected also the way that things went later.
Well, it seems that other people and artists specifically were very in need of the same things that you guys noticed were missing in the discourse, and perhaps rushed in.
Yeah. In a way, they were like casual. They were very casual invitations at first, but then we got these kind of mind blowing essays, I mean, which now have become classics, canonical, assigned readings.
In Defense of the Poor Image would be an example of instant classic.
Yeah.
Well, not so instant because it's been 10 years since we published it.
Okay.
Instant and continuous at the same time. I think I was assigned it in college, and people still are, and it's mind-blowing when one first reads it and continues to be.
It's a very good text. We just actually did this thing where we, in the bar that we opened, we started a reading group, and so we started the group with that text brutally early on Saturday morning at 7:30.
Just last weekend.
So, about 25 people showed up, very heroic people. So we read it together and then talked to Hito a little bit, just ask her some questions about the text. Because almost 10 years passed since she wrote it, and many things changed and stuff like that. But what moved me the most, perhaps, is just how beautifully written that text is. Just even on the level of language itself. It's just so fine and so it has a kind of a pictorial texture that's quite rare to find in art writing, actually. Mm-hmm.
It's a very brave voice, that text. Mm-hmm. the standpoint is some like the personal take and so on is brave in the sense that it's not taking this impartial bystander, like observer only view that the critic tends to take.
Yeah, actually, her second text for us, I wasn't even really sure if we should publish it because it was the text
the politics of art.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
About dragging the bloody corpse of contemporary art into some. It was really strange, and so I actually showed it to a couple of people because I couldn't. In a way, it like seemed almost like unpublishable in a way. Yeah, and actually, Boris Groy said that it's a masterpiece. It's like an example of post-discursive writing. Yeah. Remember that, Brian?
Yeah, I remember the text made me angry. I think I hadn't even met Hito then, and I wrote her a long email quite upset about the text. But now I assign it to my students. But I think also I think it's also interesting, Julieta, what you were saying about the courage of this kind of writing, because when we had the reading group on Saturday, we had Hito on Skype, and she said, yeah, but this text was written 9 years ago, and I think asking me about it, it's a bit like asking George Michael, what he thinks of Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart. It's really something that she in a way she immediately kind of moved on to the next thing. So it's also a very different position than from a classical intellectual or critic who wants to claim some kind of objective authority. She simply, for her, the claims are simply that she saw something and she gave it a face and a name, but then she moves on. Meanwhile, most of the people who showed up for the reading group were very young, and for them it was completely relevant. For her, it's it's ancient history.
Right.
But it's also like the thing of I think something that I was like trying to get at is the embodiment of the moving target, not the monolithic voice. But the voice that can be flexible enough and agile, as you said, Brian, and can afford to change shape over time.
Yeah.
So it's, like we can have different iterations of Hito's subjectivity, for example. And they, they are like contradictory maybe even, but they belong together. They are not mutually exclusive. So there's no absolute truths in a sense.
Yeah. And this kind of agility, I think, was always quite important. And maybe for the journal, it's what gave a lot of the writing a nice bit of a jump to it, because and a very dynamic character. In a way, it has to do with relatively. With not claiming too much authority, even a great philosopher like Boris Groys. I think what is really wonderful about his writing is that he is such a logician, and the writing technically, even if the ideas are quite complex, the writing itself is written almost like a children's book. No, I mean quite even in a hilarious way. He has a lot of fun with this in the way that he writes, where it's just extremely simple. And so also I think part of the promise of at the time of a global discourse also had to do with a fact that we didn't have much control over, but a fact that so many young artists and practitioners were reading and writing and actively using English language. And so it was. This is something that made it possible.
I think there was a combination of two things that have to do with availability. On the one hand, it was to make the discourse available as a platform, as a container, as Anton was saying. And on the other hand, it was also about making the language itself less obscure and also available. Remember what's the name of Hito's text about
International Art English?
Exactly.
International Disco Latin.
Let's talk about
International Disco Latin.
And language and access. I think these are important things to talk about. Also, just anecdotally, I was reminded of the Super Community Project, Julieta, when you mentioned something, which reminded me of the beginning of the editorial for that, just having no body and no name, etc.
Yeah, well, that was Brian's, and I think a joke that we had at the moment. That was a little bit like sympathy for the devil. It was a lot of fun editing that. Something that is nice. This is also something we discussed, was the phenomena of academic journals and peer-reviewed publications, and how the gates are, like JSTOR and things like that, how they are basically unavailable. And we wanted to produce that kind of the kind of publication that can be cited towards tenure track, for example, that has that kind of rigor, but not that kind of gatekeeping. And I think in that respect, we pretty much accomplished it. I think that people can cite having published in the journal as something that counts, even though it is not peer-reviewed.
Yeah, as a kind of para-academic publication. I think at one point we were approached by one of these organizations similar to JSTOR, which hoovers up academic journals and then packages them and sells them to university libraries by subscription. And they really wanted to include e-flux Journal, which was already free, as part of a a paid subscription.
The journal has taken a lot of different formats over the year, although it's retained certain baseline things like being online as well. But there's also print publications, and there's different ways in which the journal has existed in the world. I wonder if you guys can talk a little bit about the progression of that and just ways in which the journal has been animated both online and also in physical spaces. And
Anton, remember when we inserted journal texts in all the magazines?
Yeah, that was very funny. We kind of tried to publish one issue of the journal as advertisement using advertisement pages in other art journals, which I guess upset a lot of art journals because they didn't really like that, or they didn't get the joke. Yeah. We thought it would be great that to finish reading an essay, you have to read through Frieze and Art Forum and Parquet and whatever else, Flash Art, But they didn't think it was so funny.
No, we were forced to put like a seal saying paid content or something along those lines in every...
Yeah.
Like insurance companies and so forth have to do. I don't know, the New Yorker have to write advertisement.
I almost wish we could do that for Wonderflux.
Yeah, I think we've already done that.
Just an idea.
Yeah, there are some other plans afoot for Wonderflux. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Anton?
Well, maybe we can speak a little bit about Wonderflux itself.
Yeah. So currently, from 2 weeks ago until the end of this year, we're publishing an illustrated essay once per week. And this is something to celebrate the 10th year anniversary of the journal. We've invited a small handful of longtime contributors who are either illustrating text themselves or paired with graphic artists of all different kinds. So there's different styles, and it's a full-on comic issue. But I think that one thing that's really nice is that there's never been a graphic novel contemporary art journal that we know of necessarily, or an issue of one. And certainly e-flux Journal hasn't done that before. But it's also going to be printed, it's also going to be exhibited. And I think that these are different ways in which that...
And actually, some of the writers, like Reza Negarestani and Keith Tilford, got so excited that they are following, they are going ahead and publishing a whole thing, like a whole full-on graphic novel after the contribution to the journal.
Exactly.
Well, I guess it was like partly to maybe challenge ourselves because, at the end of the day, the journal is a kind of a pretty nerdy journal, even though it's in the arts, but it's not like, it does not really privilege images too much, yeah. So, and it's very, very, very text heavy, yeah. So
Mariana,
this was an opportunity
Mariana is a fantastic image person.
Yeah, Mariana
when
Silva.
We have images, they are great.
Exactly. And I think that the text heavy, but I think that there is a really, really strong image presence that's continued, and that certainly Mariana has shaped and evolved over the years. But this is, the graphic novel is a whole another level of that.
Yeah. Julieta, we need to take a 5-minute break because it's, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
just.
I'm here and I'm
Okay.
quite awake now.
Okay.
I think without nonsense, we have at least 5 minutes there.
Yeah.